Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, I'm certain that if you've looked at the news or social media recently, you've seen the firestorm which swept through the University of North Texas over the past few days, as of the posting of this video. I suppose you could say activist father, Jeff Younger, who's also running for the Texas legislature, came to the University of North Texas to basically state his case about something that he has gone through in his life. And that is, he has forcefully fought against the transitioning of his young son, his young child, so to speak. And his young child has actually been forcefully separated from him by the courts due to his positioning. And the argument is that his wife had been trying to transition their son since his son was 3 years old. And so obviously Younger is very much opposed to this action. And so he wanted to come to the University of North Texas to speak as to why he was opposed to this action. But instead of being met by what you would expect to be prudent and rational people who are attempting to understand the limits of their knowledge and understand other worldviews, as colleges are meant to be for, he was actually greeted by, well, I'll just let you see for yourself.
Fuck these fascists! Fuck these fascists!
F these fascists. Oh, and then there was this beauty. Oh, and then of course, this beauty.
Nazi!
Get your fucking camera away from me! Get your fucking camera away
Then
from me!
if you don't want to be my camera, get out of the way!
You get the fuck out of here!
My friends, this event contains a lot of incidences that do not at all make me proud of anything, but of my fellow man, rather. It does not make me proud of my fellow generation, because a lot of people in that video are in my generation. And I find it absolutely dismaying that that's what's happening. And a lot of people are simply linking this event as another chapter in the madness of wokery. Another chapter in woke madness. Some people are simply using the event as a matter of comedy. Oh, this is quite funny, or this just shows how crazy those leftists are. And I'll say this much. Younger didn't do himself very many favors when he said this is how leftist politics works, nor did he do himself any favors by addressing some of the people. How's he addressed them? I'll get to that in a second. But my friends, we should start off with some of the most basic of truths first. Number one, what you saw in that video and in that event, you saw the heckler's veto on full display. You saw the heckler's veto flaunting its disgusting prowess in front of all of us and shutting down a man from being able to argue a thesis, one that is not even entirely unreasonable, simply because the mob said, we will not let you, we will not assent, you shall not raise your voice on these grounds. Grounds which, by the way, are ostensibly state-funded, publicly funded, a public university, so to speak. And I think these kind of events kind of go to the absurdity of public universities. There's no such thing as a publicly owned university, especially when a group of people can hijack it and hold it hostage, or hold one of its core functions rather, hostage for their own pleasure. There's no such thing. It's an abstract idea created by the collectivists in the 30s and even before then, coming out of the progressive era, to convince you that you have control over things that you have no moral claim to. That's a different story, though. We can talk about that in another video. So the heckler's veto is obviously on display there. But also what's on display there, and Younger pointed this out in the video, and I'll put some of that in throughout this, I'll intersperse throughout this video. What's also on display there is the fact that the professors at this university, quite obviously, in some way, shape, or form, have not done enough to diffuse this kind of mentality. In fact, I need not engage in conjecture. Here is one of the professors of this university who is a self-proclaimed professor, he says he is, speaking before Younger speaks, attempting to diffuse the crowd, but listen to the reasoning he gives as to why he wants Younger to speak. Go ahead.
I'm a UNT professor. My name is Adam Briggle. I'm also a father of a transgender child. These are difficult times. What you're doing is right, but also wrong. You see, you're feeding their media narrative about how we shut down free speech.
They're gonna say that
Hold on. You're the future.
We are.
Fuck yeah, we
You
are.
spread the misinformation about our community.
We're gonna fight back. We're gonna fight.
You're about to listen to a dinosaur from the past.
He is a dinosaur.
So this professor does not want him to speak because he believes in open rational inquiry where all beliefs, no matter how sacrosanct, can be challenged. He wants him to speak so that those evil right-wing people can't have their media narratives. The professor himself even says that he doesn't even know why someone like this guy is allowed to speak, which shows that this professor lacks the foundations in his action to understand the necessity of different viewpoints. He lacks the foundations. This professor is simply a tame version of these students, my friends. And so you have the lost leading the lost to bad ends. But it gets deeper. It gets so much deeper. The two things I just said to you are some of the most obvious things that everyone's pointing out to you. But what no one is telling you is that video, when you watch it, you're actually bearing witness to a murder. Oh, yes. Professors who assent to this kind of behavior are guilty of murder. Now, what do I mean? My friends, some of you may not be ready for this, so if you're not ready for this, just click off right now. About to go deep. My friends, human beings process information in a way that engages all of our senses, where we can touch, feel, see, hear, everything. All that goes into how we process and gather information, obviously. We may associate a particular place with a certain kind of smell or a certain kind of sound, and that sound, that smell, no matter where it is, no matter where we see it, will automatically always remind us of that place. Okay. And I think our process of understanding the world and the processes that go into that idea is something that I call the soul. The soul, my friends, this is my definition that I've gathered from my understanding of how human knowledge works and how human emotions work. The soul is simply the processes that go into helping us understand the world that we cannot immediately apprehend, or that others cannot immediately apprehend. So my emotions, which are a part of the soul, unless I show them, cannot be immediately seen by someone else. My values, unless I act them out, unless I live them out, cannot be immediately seen by another person. All of that stuff is contained in my soul because it rests inside me. And I must make a conscious decision to activate it whenever I'm in any kind of context. Because if I don't, you will know very little about me. But the problem is, even if I do activate something, how do you know it's truly what I believe? And this is the question. This is why the soul is such an elusive idea. Traditions throughout the world have considered, what is the soul? What does it mean? What is it? How can we understand it? How can we detect it? Because we don't truly know when it's in front of us. If you're a Christian like I am, the soul has another dimension to it as well. The soul is also what basically your spirit, which again is an entirely different line of thought that I don't want to pursue right now. But let's say that we all have souls. We all have things that cannot be seen that go into how we understand the world. If we accept that simple fact, then we can see how the soul can be tainted by ignorance. If we understand the world through our senses, and our senses use observation of some kind, we observe what something smells like, we observe what something looks like, and we use those things to understand things. What happens when I can no longer see the world for what it truly is? What happens when I begin to ignore the laws of reality? What happens when I begin to confuse my own opinion, my own subjective opinion, with moral truth? Well, what happens is I begin creating a different world that my senses are attuned to, that you don't know I'm living in until I show them to you in the form of me screaming at this guy in this video, and that guides my understanding of the world. And what I'm posing to all of you is that these people are obviously under the spell of something that is informing their opinion of the world and informing them in a very false way, because they are using terms in the wrong way as well. You can see this is how they use the terms. So they said Sit down fascist, shut up fascist, F you fascist, all kinds of things about fascist. These kids are saying that this man younger is a fascist for questioning if his child is to be transitioned. And yet, none of them actually understand what it means to be a fascist. But this very basic error is actually a bigger flaw as well. So we understand the world, my friends, in something called categories. Categories are what we call in philosophy, we call them heuristics. And all heuristics are, they're very simple ways that we can use, shortcuts we can use to understand the world. So we use categories to group things together to better understand them. So you could say, for example, that a boot belongs to the category of footwear, or a dress shoe belongs to the category of formal footwear. And so things that are formal wear, we would group it together in one category. Things that are not, another category. This is just a very easy way of understanding the world. Now, unfortunately, these very simple tools that we can use to understand the world, they can also be used to simplify the world as well. And this is what their use of the word fascist is doing. I'm going to put up for you on the screen an excerpt from Mussolini's essay about the doctrine of fascism. And I'm going to just read you one of the principles stated in that essay. And this is a principle that basically underlies what fascists believe about the individual. In the fascist conception of history, man is man only by virtue of the spiritual process to which he contributes as a member of the family, the social group, the nation, and in the function of history to which all nations bring their contribution. Outside history, man is a non-entity. Fascism is therefore opposed to all individualistic abstractions based on 18th century materialism. Now, what that means in simple layman's terms is this. Fascism believes that the individual is not the individual. They are simply a part of a hive mind, of a collective, and that the individual can only be considered as part of a hive mind and collective, and any other idea of the individual is a false idea which takes away from the hive mind and the collective, which in the mind of a fascist is a grave moral offense, a cardinal sin, so to speak. Now, there are two different flavors of this panning out in world history. With Nazism, the collective was the Aryan race, this false idea of the Aryan superior race, so to speak, the false idea that Hitler had. For Mussolini, it was the all-powerful, time-bending, history-busting state. That was what took dominion over the individual and uprooted their value from them and put them in the state. But in either case, to be a fascist, the category of fascist contains a disdain, a hatred for the individual. Now, riddle me this. How in the world is Jeff Younger, someone who is trying to preserve his child's ability to choose his individual identity when he matures, when he gets older, how in the world is someone who's trying to preserve his child's individualism anything but an individualist and not a fascist? It is a categorical falsehood, a categorical error to say that Younger, who is fighting for his child's individuality, is fighting for fascism. And yet, the people in this video, the kids at North Texas, don't care that they're making a categorical error, a categorical mistake, because it's not about the meaning of the word fascist. It's actually about what they associate the word fascist with. Now, let me help you with this. Let me help you with this. Now, in a world where the soul that I just talked about is a very real thing, a very real engine of our growth, of our spiritual and logical understanding that no one can apprehend but us until we bring it out in the forefront. In a world where that happens and the soul is an actual thing, how are we going to be able to interact with our soul and do anything with our soul, our ability to think, our emotions, and grow them in a healthy way if we don't even recognize what is true and what is not true, if we don't even recognize what certain words mean and what they don't mean? This sort of de-evolution, devolving of language has racked the minds of so many youth and has caught them up, and professors like the one you saw in this video are directly a part of that, but it goes deeper. It goes deeper. Not only is this de-evolution of language harming our ability to apprehend or interact with the soul, rather, it's also harming our ability to function properly as human beings. Now, one of my favorite natural law theorists, Henry Home Lord Keynes, who was a brilliant Scottish Enlightenment figure, he gave this analogy of man, of human beings, as a sort of complex organism. Now, we're a complex organism, he says, which is a collection of like springs and weights that bounce off of each other and create equilibrium. And this is true from a biological standpoint as well. Everything in our body is aimed towards equilibrium, towards a perfect state where all the functions of our body can fire in the similar directions and all cohere to create a living, breathing, healthy human being. And whenever one of these functions degrades, the rest of the body tends to degrade, right? And this is how it happens. And so Keynes basically says that there are general principles of action, and these principles of action all work together, and when they work together, life is beautiful. But the moment one of these weights or one of these springs or one of these functions of our body goes missing, everything goes to chaos. Now, in this case, the moment our ability to reason goes missing, our passions spring out of control and they overtake us. And we clearly see what that leads to. Keynes says it leads to boorish and savage behavior. That's what he means, at least. I'm inferring that from what he says. And you see that kind of behavior absolutely on display in the video that I've shown you. In the video of Younger being assailed by these people. You see them not using their reason. You see people screaming, jumping on top of tables, just belching out the most odious things that have no basis to them, all through emotion. Now, here's the thing. Keynes says we can fix this through two ways: reflection and education. Now, let's go back to the soul. We're going to tie it all back. How in the world are we going to reflect on our behavior once again if we are convinced that our behavior is just by the worldview that we're operating under, the worldview that whatever I don't like, whatever I can associate with evil is therefore this particular thing, and that worldview being used to do political action in the classroom, in society? How in the world can we reflect? We can't. So what we have here is not just a bunch of people who are infected with bad ideas. No. Even worse, we have a bunch of people who don't even understand that reality is very real, that the laws of reality are very real, and our ability to reflect on our actions, reflect on ourselves, understand our human nature is integral to decision making. It's integral to a healthy and functional life. It's integral to any kind of human life at all that is going to function in a civilized way. But when you don't have that realization, what happens? Chaos happens. So this is not simply a problem of wokeness. This is a problem of the human condition. And guess what? It's not just the woke kids that fall down to this. It's random politicos, people who have respectable beliefs, who at a moment's notice can just snap and let their passions overtake them and take them down a path they don't want to go. That's why do you think at protests, gunfights happen sometimes? Why do you think at protests or in political events, things get really heated and people just go fight each other? It's not just because there's passions. It's because the passions are overtaking your ability to subdue them beneath your inherent human capacity. That's why. So what you're seeing on display, what you're seeing on display with these kids at North Texas is not just these kids at North Texas being crazy. It's what happens when you reject the fundamental laws of reality. It's what happens when you don't pay attention to natural law. It's what happens when you try to define things and define reality on your own terms. And it's what happens when all of those things lead to the destruction of the soul. And if enough people were to endorse those same principles as the folks over at North Texas have, at least the people in that room, there are plenty of good folks over at North Texas, I'm sure, what would happen? Well, when people are at enmity with one another, at conflict, at odds, at each other's throats, what happens? Well, conflict happens, obviously. I just repeated myself. Bad things happen. Now, when that is applied to a grand scale and everyone in the civilization is at odds with each other, what happens? Civilization breaks down. This is why the philosopher Hugo Grosch said that all human beings have an inherent tendency for a peaceable existence. Because if we didn't, civilization would be impossible. The thing is, if you're not able, again, to reflect on the soul and reflect on your behavior, and then attune your behavior to what is right, to what is good, to what is proper according to your very human existence, then you're not going to be able to have a life at all, much less a life that is geared around fighting fascist or communism or whatever you want to fight. My friends, we have to understand these first principles, because not understanding them leads to destruction, decay, and devolves into nonsense. And right now we already have enough nonsense running our universities, as was on display in this video. Think on it. My friends, I love you. If you love me, patreon.com/officialcwatson, PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com. You can get me on my social medias, Instagram and Twitter. It's going to be official C Watson as well, or my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive, stay human, stay truthful, and don't let your passions get the best of you. Bye, guys.